So excited about mine.
Good morning, guys. So welcome to another Office Hours, October 10th. Let's start with some announcements. So Nate, do you want to kick it off with our good news?
Oh yeah, so Lever raised money to continue working on our main product, which is hiring software, but also we are obviously investing more in the framework. So we've got a nice, cool $10 million to go hire people with and build awesome stuff. For that end, we're hiring a lot of people. Go to lever.co and check us out. If you didn't know who we are.
Well, you know, we're gonna. Some of those people will be engineers, of course, and they will be programming in Derby. So they need to learn it. And all right, so I know Pavel, you said you had some things that you could announce or talk about.
Yes, so we have updated the DerbyJS library to support all of the native Jade features, like the exports, the extend, the includes, the mixins, all of this stuff that we were lacking before. So now it's the full-featured Jade implementation. Also, Vladimir has updated Derby login for lots of new cool features. He added a new, a better encryption by default. It was I guess RSA before. Now it's something more fancy. Oh, bcrypt. It was SHA-1 by default. Now it's bcrypt. Also, he added a password restore functionality, all of this stuff that's required for the authorization. Also, we figured out how to set up a working DerbyJS to working on a cluster. We're using a days project. So the only thing we had to update over there is to make their router of work with the sticky sessions. So you can find it in our repository also, in a dmapper repository. So, well, that's it from us.
Cool. All right, and then let's see. Joseph, have you been enjoying yourself, relaxing? Did anything?
Yeah, so, I've been on holidays for the last little while, and I'll sort of be on holidays for the next bit of time. So I left Lever. I'm going back to Australia at the end of November, so in 2 months now. I've been spending a bunch of time, when I've been programming, working on just random little projects, which has been a lot of fun. I've been taking a bit of a break from ShareJS, but I'm going to start getting back into it. This weekend, if anyone's in San Francisco, Salesforce is hosting a hackathon for whatever reason, but they're encouraging people, Salesforce and Heroku, and they're encouraging people from the open source world to come along. And so I'm going to go along and work on ShareJS at the hackathon. There's prizes for people who are working on open source projects at the hackathon, so I'll probably spend the weekend working on ShareJS there. Jason announced and released, he fixed all the bugs that my randomizer found in the rich text editor, and he, in the rich text editor for Quill and the OT code for that, and he's released all of that. So now you can do rich text editing with ShareJS using Quill, which is nice. That happened last week, I think, and I'm going to be in the city this afternoon pairing with him to try and clean up some things and, work on whatever. So there's that, and I've got a few plans for ShareJS and LiveDB that I want to start working on when I start getting back into it a bit more. But yeah, I'll wait and, announce things as I get them written and done. So that's me.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. And Nate, let me unmute you.
I can unmute myself. But thank you for that. So I haven't been doing a lot of coding because I've been focusing on hiring, but which will be high leverage in the long run. But what I have been doing, I just got back into Derby standalone code, which is basically, if you're not aware of it, one of the cool ideas that we have with Derby is that you can actually run it both as a client-side only thing, sort of like Angular, or as a server-side only thing, or as a kind of real-time synced front end and back end, and really all the different pieces are modular. And that's like one of the big strengths of Derby compared to Meteor is that we've got all these different layers: ShareJS, Racer, Derby, and you can use any subset of them, and they work really well. So the Derby standalone is basically Derby minus ShareJS, which is really useful for prototyping and really cool way to like start learning some of the framework stuff. And then you can just like write your components only in like a browser and then hook them up to a backend, and then it just works. So it's pretty cool that you can basically author components that are maybe somewhat similar to Angular components or whatnot, but they just always will work with server-side rendering and will always work with ShareJS as the backend because the API is the same. So it's a pretty powerful concept, we think, and we'll let people kind of experiment with the framework and get, attract more people to it, and then eventually when they're like, hey, I want to deploy this for reals, they'll take advantage of all this other stuff. So a lot of it is just kind of separating the pieces a little bit better, since there's naturally been little pieces that got stuck to each other for whatever reasons. One thing I'm also doing is I'm going to take tracks out of the default Derby install and eventually take ShareJS out of the default Derby install so that you like separately install them all. It'll just be like 2 more lines of code, but that is really cool because then you can like just use Derby for HTML rendering in something that doesn't need to connect live, or you can just use the standalone Derby on the client. So.
Actually, I was already wrote a small application on Derby standalone. I was trying to run it in Node WebKit. So the only thing which we are lacking for Derby standalone is the way to compile the actual views from a separate file. So right now you have to, you have to either try to plug somehow the server-side Derby just for the views compilation, so that you have this compiled JavaScript that you can push to the client side, and the same thing for the style sheets, right? So there is no easy way to bundle all of this into one thing and push it.
I mean, the primary goal is not to have a server component, to not have a build step, just to be like, hey, if you just want to play around with this thing, you can play around with it, you can put it in a browser, and you can just require this file, and then it's up to you to figure out the rest of it, which is like how Angular and everything else works, right? Like they don't have a built-in builder, although people have built a number of them. So I'd like to have a version of it that doesn't make any assumptions at all about how you're going to do that. But then also, I expect people would build tools around that to integrate with it. But there's a lot of stuff out there already for that. I don't know that we really need to build that. Like Yeoman and things already do a lot of that, so I don't know that we need to.
But can we actually use the existing Derby code to compile stuff?
What do you mean by compile stuff? You mean like make compile templates?
Yeah, compile views, because I just had to get a couple of functions like compile views, compile styles from the Derby core, and just use them to compile things. And
well, so for styles, I would like to keep that out entirely, because that's sort of meant for when you have the full stack Derby. And really, people have their own CSS stuff, so no need to reinvent that. For the views, the advantage to compiling them is that you don't have to include Esprima or any of the heavyweight parsing code on the client, and it's therefore also faster to initialize. So basically what Derby does in the full stack solution is it takes the templates, parses them, goes through Esprima, goes through a bunch of HTML parsing, builds these objects, and then serializes those objects into a JavaScript file. And so that could be built. That's pretty specific to Derby, and that should probably exist as a utility where you could be run that over some code, and then there should be a Derby standalone light version that doesn't have the parsing. So there's just a whole bunch of different pieces. There's the part that does real time that connects to a server. There's the part that does templating and parsing. There's the part that just renders the core stuff. There's the routing thing, and I'm just trying to break them apart as much as possible so that you can use any subset of those things. And eventually, we'd like to have the ability to connect to like a hosted backend, right? Like, you know, a la Firebase. Like, you should just be able to connect to a compatible backend that you don't host yourself.
Oh, also another question on Derby standalone. Is there a way to run a particular route? Because when I end up writing a bunch of apt-gets, then to actually render the particular page, you have to do like app history refresh for it to work.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna like pull that out entirely first. So I think track shouldn't be included at all, which is the routing library I wrote.
Yeah.
And then you can just do it yourself, or use somebody else's routing library in the client, or make tracks like a little more standalone so that it works, even if it may still be somewhat tied to Derby, but it should work more easily in both regular Derby and Derby standalone. So this is ultimately kind of a big project, but I am just doing the quick wins right now, which is like taking some of the tighter decoupling or tighter couplings out, specifically like the routing thing and the basic stuff that was being included that was just unnecessary.
So, kind of back to the template thing. I'm trying to wrap my head around that because when I've used Derby standalone, I make a script tag, right, and put my template in there, and this is all in one HTML file.
Yeah.
And there's awesome code that like grabs all the script tags that are type text template or something like that, right? And it compiles them right there, right? For
Yeah, definitely. Like, so that works, and that's kind of the main use case for Derby standalone is you're just like messing around with stuff in the browser and you do everything client side. But I think what Pablo is saying is like Derby already has all this code to like load a bunch of files and file them and stuff. So if you'd rather write your files that way, which is pretty reasonable, but you also just want a client side only thing, then there's this sort of middle ground thing where it's like I want a build step, but I don't want a server, right?
So we actually had a real use case for standalone, which was one of our clients, which is Deloitte, didn't want any information going out of their system. So they wanted training to be done for their employees where each person just was on their own browser and going through a simulation rather than actually sort of getting any information that's going out of their network anywhere else. So for us, that was the use case where it wasn't just sort of like test, it was actually a production use case. We haven't done that live with them yet. We're probably going to do it in a month or so. But you know, it's a real case where they have a need for a standalone version.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think there is a good need for the standalone version. I mean, it shouldn't be too hard just to write a tool that wraps the calls to render, dumps it into a file or something, and then we could use like Watchify or any of these, you know, file system watching things. Actually, which Derby kind of already has. Like I'm imagining a script, and I would be surprised if it was longer than like 60 lines or something, which would take some command line arguments. You could point at a directory and say, hey, here's all my views, and it would compile them or potentially do file watches and recompile every time any of the files were changed, which would then spit out a JavaScript bundle file that could be pulled in through Browserify or through anything else. Like that should be right.
Actually, what I end up doing is like I did it exactly like this. I used I made it to be able to run the same application as a Derby standalone or as a full stack Derby, so that you have all of this real-time updates, but you still can run like production build so that it builds only the standalone version.
Nice.
That's kind of clever, actually. Yeah, so you can totally do that. I think the thing I want to do with standalone is figure out how to distribute this in a halfway reasonable way, but also like do or don't include the view parsing of the client. So our use case for standalone that I'd actually like to do soonish is our application interface that we use for people applying to jobs. It is all just built in jQuery, actually, like old school wise, which is fine, but that means we don't get to reuse any of our components that we wrote. And so We do want it to just be a standard REST API. We don't need that to be real time. It's not really helpful at all for that interface. And there's no sense having all the overhead of like having a WebSockets connection or a long pole connection. So for that, I'd like to use Derby standalone because I'd like to get all the components that we have and also, be able to have it be a pretty traditional web app in the sense that it's just like AJAX and regular requests.
So, kind of back to the template loading thing. What if could you do the template or the script tags with a source where you load the file, and this be like sort of a way to do it more like just generic web development, where like you have a directory of your the HTML templates, they all get included client side, right? So they're not getting parsed build step, but it would allow you to still kind of develop a website with your HTML, and then is that?
I think we should have tooling to be able to do both, but like I sort of imagine, I think about it in the CoffeeScript situation, like CoffeeScript originally, I'm not sure if Jeremy originally wrote this code or someone else did it, but like they had code to point it at a CoffeeScript file or have script source equals application / CoffeeScript or something, and then you would include a CoffeeScript script file that would then go through all of those JavaScript, all of the CoffeeScript tags, and replace them with the compiled JavaScript. So with CoffeeScript, you can have inline CoffeeScript inside your web page, but I mean obviously it just means that it's got to do an awful lot more work when you load the page. It's got to download and run all of S primer and all that stuff. Like it's totally doable for development, and I think that we should support both methods. But I think it also really makes sense to have a standalone tool that people can run using Make or run using npm prepublish or something that'll just bundle everything up. Basically a browser RFI equivalent for for Derby templates, I think would be really useful for a lot of use cases, even if that still worked.
Yeah, and that's actually pretty easy to do because the way that the Derby templates get kind of parsed out right now is it basically just creates a giant script file. Like all it does is like create one script file that creates all the views. So it's not that much extra code.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
Cool. So that's a lot of good ideas. Glad to hear that people are excited about that. So I guess I'll try and make that happen. Yeah. So my motivations, I guess, were mostly in the meantime to get more people excited about it. But it sounds like people also want this for production. So that's good to
know. So Pavel, you had a question about, or it was just pointing out that we need to do something with Derby.
Yeah. And I wanted to point out that we don't actually have any working example of the current LiveDB API. So Joseph has moved Redis out of the core of LiveDB. So now it's a separate driver. So and in order for Derby and like Share and whatever to use this Redis driver, you need to include it in a completely different way than we did it before.
Yes.
And that is written in Derby examples. And it was quite a problem for us to figure this out.
Okay. There is documentation in the LiveDB README, which talks about it and talks about the different ways to instantiate LiveDB to set it up with your different backends. That documentation might not be flagged enough, or maybe we should improve it or something. Maybe it should be referenced. Pulling it up now.
Put a link in the chat so I can.
I'll put it in chat. But yeah, the README for LiveDB should. Like it does describe how to use it. But this is reasonably near, as of a couple months ago or something. Yeah. But you're right. We probably should have more examples or something that use it. It would be really nice. I've been thinking about this lately. It'd be really nice, like, to have some really kick-ass tutorials and stuff to go through, like, to take people through, like, setting up an app with Derby and setting up an app with, ShareJS and all these kind of things. I've been thinking about this. I've been working on this little side project called Boilerplate, and I don't have a good tutorial or set of tutorials around it, but it's something that I would really like to make, as like a teaching tool for, hey, this is a new thing. Like this is, some stuff on how to use it and how everything works. I don't know, it's something I care about. Anyway, but yeah, there's that documentation. So I'm sorry that wasn't obvious, or it wasn't more easily findable. Did you find that, Pavel, or were you just did you not find did you find that and read it and it wasn't good enough, or did you not find that at all? Because they're different problems.
Did I not find what?
The documentation that I linked.
Oh yeah, I found it myself. I went through the code, and there is stuff in the code how to use LiveDB with the Redis. So I didn't. I actually looked at the document at the README first, but I didn't understand how to plug it with LiveDB Mongo. Okay. But you have a good documentation how to use LiveDB Mongo and the Redis in the comments of Redis driver. So that's actually what I used.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah. Also, all the Derby examples are not hosted properly anymore. So there's some cleanup work that needs to be done around that.
Yeah. Oh, actually, we have. We were supposed to mention it last office hours, but there were no last office hours. So we updated Derby examples to use Racer Highway, so you can accept the pull request.
Oh, that's great.
Sometime.
Yeah, that probably makes sense to do as the default now. That's cool. I will look into it.
Yep, cool.
Nice. Yeah, and so in my near-term things, I would like to mostly focus on these things that'll help people get up and running. So some work on the Derby example, standalone, and documentation is probably what I'll be doing.
Yeah. And Joseph, about the tutorials, did you see the tutorials we wrote for Derby?
Yeah, I did. I didn't look at them in depth there. It's something that I want to,
Were you thinking about some kind of a different kind of tutorials?
I don't know, actually. I haven't thought enough about it yet. It's just something I like. I guess I'm imagining something that, something interactive that lets, making a little interactive tool that lets someone have, on one side a view, and then on the other side the template, what it actually renders to, and then so they can edit it, and then we can have a sort of step-by-step, okay, welcome to Derby templates. This is the things you need to know about Derby templates, and as we go through this, we're going to, this is the standard thing. I did a tutorial on the MOS 6502, which is this old CPU used for programming Atari, the old Atari and Commodore 64 and Apple II. And I was reading up this great tutorial on how to use the assembly for that, and it was here's this little program, run it and step through it like this, and now, this is what the different things do. Okay, now try and change it to make it do this thing instead. And it had a whole series of examples like that just inline in one page, and it was really great. I don't know, there's a lot of stuff like that I think would be really fun to do, which isn't just text. But I mean, obviously it's difficult with all the server-side stuff to get good tutorials like that, but yeah. Yeah.
So,
I don't know.
yeah, no, that sounds really great. And I was recently made aware of this Vue.js library I put in the chat, which seems to be kind of yet another React client-side only, data binding thing. And they actually have a nice guide, which is the documentation, and their examples are kind of exactly that. They're just JS fiddles, though. And since it's client-side only, of course, it makes that part easier.
Yeah.
But I think, this is something that we could, take some inspiration from, let's say. It's very simple, but, it's very accessible.
By the way, Joseph, if you feel like doing any ShareJS bug work, the top thing that would be really helpful would be if the client missed some operation version, I think I told you about this in the past, but if the client missed some version, if it could just request from the server the versions in between and then like work again. Because right now, if it gets into that state, it gives you this like operation from the future error, and then it just doesn't receive any more updates.
So 2 things on that. First of all, yes, I agree with you. That's a bug. Secondly, and we should absolutely fix that and do that at some point.
Sure.
But that implies, like, if that's possible, that means that something else has gone wrong.
Yes. But what ended up happening with Pavel's thing is, like, he was running this game, and they were at, I don't know, like, many versions. And, like, it happened once. And sure, it definitely was, like, it shouldn't happen. But, like, if it happens once, then they basically had to, like, reset everything. So,
yeah, sure.
If it happens once out of 20,000 times, then it's kind of not that big of a deal.
Yeah. So my plan going forward is to, like, the next set of things that I'm going to be working on is I want to do a whole lot of cleanup and stuff. I started a branch for ShareJS 0.8 just before I left Leva. And there's a few bug fixes I'm going to have to put across into that branch, which made it to master, but not made it across to that branch. But there's a whole bunch of little changes that I've been making there and little code cleanups. I've restructured how a lot of the code, where a lot of the code lives. I've moved everything to Browserify, and yeah, that'll probably, like, that's the kind of change that I'd be quite happy to make there. But also, if anyone can get a good repro case for that, then I would love to, like, track the actual bug down and fix the bug. Hopefully that shouldn't happen to anybody. So.
Well, the problem is that we tried to track it down like 4 times. We had had this error 4 times, but there was no server-side errors, and like the uplog was fine, like everything was fine. There were no clues why did it happen.
Okay, yeah, I mean,
it's just rare enough that it's hard to track down for them.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree, and we can make that fix. That should be reasonably easy. But yeah, I mean, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm saying that like, they're not being able to track it down. I'm just saying that if anyone does, that would be a really big boon to for my sanity if these kind of things are fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this case, we could just build an artificial test that is pretty simple, like a unit test where you miss a version and then you send a later version, right? So, like, this is very unit testable.
Yeah, that's easy enough.
And then the other use case we have is for really big migrations. We'd like to not publish those changes if it's very unlikely that people need them, and that way we can basically safely create operations that clients don't know about, and then they can lazily know about them if something happens in the document later. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, actually.
So that actually be kind of, it would allow us to do something else, which would be helpful.
My concern with that, and I'm not sure if this is bad enough to care about, but my concern with that is things like if you create a new document, change another document to reference that new document, then if you're not going to update the client, then it's entirely possible that you don't get, like, now you at some point get the operation that references the other document, but you don't have that other document. I mean, maybe then you can just kind of fetch it or something. But yeah. So I mean, there's kind of this sort of like mutual reference thing that if multiple objects all, I mean, I guess this is just generally a problem with ShareJS right now anyway. But if you've got like multiple objects that reference each other, and then only some of those objects are being updated because they were actually changed by another user or something, then the client might be able to get in some really weird states. It's just something to watch out for.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think like the common case, it's one of those things where like it probably wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, so. I agree. I think the feature wouldn't be a problem. I think that we can add it safely. I mean, obviously, and it'll work around any bugs to operation out of order problems. In fact, it might even make it so that Socket.io kind of works too, which,
Yeah, I mean, like if Socket.io works 95% of the time, even that might be good enough, right? Like, and it probably works more than that. It probably works like 99% of the time. So it might actually be okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we can definitely do it. But yeah, can you file an issue on that? Or do we
Yeah,
have?
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Yeah.
That would just be in ShareJS, right?
Yeah. The JS client should recover if it gets operations out of order.
Yep. That's good. And we already have the like get bulk ops thing, so it should be pretty easy to wire up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet.
Cool. So, do we have any other questions or bugs you'd like to bring up at this time? No. Then maybe we'll wrap it up for this week, and I'm also excited to help Nate with documentation examples. So hopefully we'll be putting new stuff out real soon, and next week will be even more exciting, right? So.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks everybody. Good seeing y'all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Later.